Hello, I'm Don Moores, and welcome to Montgomery Week in Review. As both the Republican and Democratic parties tried to decide how they're going to spin the nomination in the upcoming hearing of Judge Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court, the final hearing perhaps, it's impossible to know how these decisions on Capitol Hill will impact the midterm elections here in Maryland and around the country. Brian Karem, executive editor of the Sentinel, he's going to give us his thoughts on this. The Secretary of Education, Betsy de Vos, is encouraging school systems around the world to arm teachers in our public schools to combat possible violence against students. At the moment, Maryland is not considering taking this path. Fred Evans, a former teacher and administrator in Montgomery County Public Schools, has a definite opinion on this subject. He's here to share it with us. September is Suicide Prevention Month. EveryMind, one of the great organizations in our county, has many programs available to the people in our community to help them meet the challenges in their own families, schools, and neighborhoods. Jennifer Grinnell from EveryMind is here. She's got this story. With the 2018 general election just over 1 month away, many groups and people, including the League of Women Voters, have expressed concerns about potential voter suppression. Ralph Watkins from the Maryland League of Women Voters is here to tell us what's happening around the country to try to ensure that no vote is suppressed. Brian Karem, welcome back.
Thanks.
Seems like you were here just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
it seems that way.
You know, again, we're so proud of you as you're there in the White House briefing room, press room, getting lambasted by the president's press secretary and others.
Because you got to have fun somewhere.
Well, just for doing your job. Tell us, you know, you're really in this position between the national and international world and here locally with the Sentinel. How is all of this stuff with Kavanaugh going to impact, do you think, these upcoming midterm elections?
That's actually a really good question because this is a national and international story that has its roots in Montgomery County.
It sure does.
And most of the controversy surrounds things that occurred during high school in Montgomery County. And it's the accuser and the accused and what they did while they were in school in Montgomery County. And what you see is that in both cases, the Republicans are trying to force this nomination through without a hearing, without FBI investigation. The Democrats, prior to the November general election, the midterms, because they feel like there's going to be a blue wave and they'll lose whatever impetus they have and won't be able to push that nomination through. And then the Democrats are intent on stalling it no matter what. And what's lost in the process, I think, is the real human story of what occurred. And that's what's disturbing to me because whatever your feelings, whether you believe that Kavanaugh should or shouldn't sit for a lifetime seat on the Supreme Court, do we not have the ability to at least pause, take a breath, investigate this, and vet it for what it is, and allow someone who has a claim to sexual assault to be heard? And we should.
But you're talking about something that would be a reasonable, rational process.
And there is no reasonable, rational process in D.C. these days. That's true.
But you're also talking about one of the most political decisions that's, going back to the beginning of our country's history, is the decision as to who are going to be Supreme Court justices. That has been politics.
And this is a particularly pivotal role because the seat that this man is going to take over is seen as the swing seat in the Supreme Court, and the Republicans. The only reason why many Republicans are still backing Trump is because they want that second seat, because they want to be able to influence the Supreme Court for the next 20 to 30 years.
Get rid of abortion, get rid of a lot of things.
Absolutely. All the progress that was made, they want to throw it back. And that's why, by the way, one of the most uncovered stories are the hundreds of federal judgeships that have been filled during this administration. So this is a very pivotal role with a very Montgomery County flavor to it.
No, go ahead.
I think the most important comment, you made a lot of good comments, is we're not looking at what potentially happened. And that's really the case. Was she is her story true, and how do we find that out in a rational way, especially for such an important appointment like the Supreme Court justice?
And it's hard to, what I find is, it is incredible, and I find it disheartening if you've been a victim of sexual assault. There are people that are judging this woman without ever hearing what she had to say. It's very hard as a victim of sexual assault to come forward at all. And this is the reason why, because she's being prejudged prior to ever being heard. And I can tell you, this is not the right way to do it.
It's based on, and people take their positions based on their partisan interest.
Absolutely.
There's no interest in the truth of the story. They're taking a
There's a
partisan position.
pretense that there's an interest in the truth of the story. However, if the truth of the story doesn't fit your pretense, you don't care about the truth of the story. And that's, and you know, I
want to just pitch in here. As a Montgomery County Public School graduate and MCPS principal and all this stuff, none of these kids involved were public school graduates.
No,
these are all from the finest of
schools
the
in the land.
Private schools.
No, finest private
schools.
private schools.
Well spoken.
Well, look, and let me, as a teen, I was not molested by a priest, but I was assaulted by a mentor when I was a teen, and it was very difficult for me and I fended it off and fought it off and told my mother and didn't talk about it for years. And it's a hard issue to talk about. And if you do not allow this woman to be, to have her say, I feel like we've done a great injustice to this country. And it hurts me to my very core that we are making politics over something as basic and as vital as our civil liberties and being molested.
Jennifer, you've got a question. We have 30 seconds left in this
I
segment.
didn't know if the general public, do we have any say? Is there anything we can do in the public to
Well, there's
to
a
let the
wonderful
story be heard?
I'd call your representative and say,
Okay.
let this woman be heard.
Okay.
And the FBI should investigate.
But ultimately, we'll get to our last story, which is all about the voters, because that's where the politics comes in, is which side, I think.
Eventually, yes.
Eventually, on November 6th,
but
right?
more people have to vote.
More people have to vote. Brian, this story has so much more twists and turns, so many more twists and turns. So look forward to having you come back on this and so many other issues. Thanks a lot.
Always. It's always a pleasure to be here, Don.
Always a pleasure to have you here.
Well, I thank you, sir.
Fred Evans, another pleasure.
Thank you.
But not a very pleasurable topic for you. This whole proposition to have guns in the hands of teachers in our classrooms, where does this come from?
When I first heard it, as most people know if they've ever heard me on the show, I was in education, still am, but still teach, but in the Montgomery County schools for 30 years. And when I first heard this proposal by Betsy de Vos, our Secretary of Education, I went through the roof. My wife will tell you that. And
I can see that, Fred.
there is not one aspect of this proposal that has any common sense whatsoever.
Well, let's go through that. If you could, because I hear that, and then I hear from the other side, well, guns, we're going to stop, and people have to think. So, can you go through some of the points in terms of the threat to students, this threat by students, whatever, with having a gun in the classroom? What are some of the specifics?
Well, there are a couple threats. One is, what if let's take an extreme case. What if a student physically attacks a teacher, physically torments a teacher, not even attack, and that teacher feels threatened? Will he or she pull that weapon on that student or threaten them with that weapon and then get into a confrontation? Maybe they won't shoot them, but get into a confrontation.
All the more important, we see that with police officers who are trained to try to relax in those times.
No question.
They still get impatient.
And get their guns
the
taken away from them.
the overwhelming point is schools, in my opinion, are not places where this kind of action should be happening. We do have, and I had the first one in Montgomery County, we do have school resource officers in all our high schools. They carry weapons, but they are trained, they are police officers, and I don't know of a situation yet where someone has been, quote, shot or accidentally shot by a school resource officer. I do know of situations where, because they were there, they were either able to fend off or to stop a potential. So let me get back to the point. The other point is that the monies that would be used, that's behind the scenes, the monies that would be used to purchase these weapons and to train the people would be taken away from other educational programs.
Well, and that's my question.
And not it wouldn't be new funding. It would be
what Betsy de Vos has proposed is to take existing funding away from teachers in order to arm them. And here's my question. I know many teachers who spend their own money every year for school supplies.
Ordinary school supplies.
Ordinary school supplies. So
Absolutely.
instead of investing in the
Absolutely.
guns, why don't we take that money and invest it in the school supplies,
supplies.
and let teachers do what they're there
and
to
the
do,
studies,
teach.
I did some research before the show today just to get more data, and various groups who have studied this issue says that it would not be a prevention measure at all. In fact, it may enhance the possibility of more shootings.
Well,
And
and what,
accidental, or the gun is taken away from
I
the
just think of
teacher
loose
by
guns.
a student.
Right, I think of loose
who
guns
needs
with
a loose
right.
gun in a schoolroom? And now, what are you going to do? Are you going to lock it up inside your desk drawer, or are you going to have it armed? Is it going to be loaded or unloaded? Where are the bullets going to be? If you've got a kid, and teachers get their desk broken into all the time already, what's to keep a child from breaking into it? Oh, well, okay, you got to keep it in a purse or a satchel. Then what? You're going to have those things get stolen. The potential for violence increases when you increase the number of guns in a situation.
And there's just so much evidence to confirm that. And I have talked to a lot of current principals and colleagues. I haven't heard one say, "Oh, that's a really good idea. That would make our school a lot safer." You know, what we need to do is enhance entryways to schools, a whole variety of things. The fact that we have a concept, not a concept, a language of school shootings is an outrage.
Well-
we now accept that as, oh yeah, there's going to be another school shooting.
But let me throw
It's
this
not
back to you.
just school
because of the school because it has been a part of our life. You're saying that entranceway changes and other, I guess, perimeter kind of whatever in controlling ingress and egress in the school. There are a lot of safety measures, and we have a little bit less than a minute left. I apologize for
that's all right.
so little time. So are those things happening
Those
now?
things are happening now. I've noticed it because I still visit schools. I teach my class in the Montgomery County School, so I have to buzz in,
Right.
which wasn't true when I was
just
when
walk
I was
right in.
when
Right.
I was an administrator. And but the other thing is
30
that
seconds.
you need to train kids and staff on what are the signals that this kid may be a danger
Gotcha.
to himself or to others. So the whole mental health
Every mind's going to come in and help you with
the
that.
whole mental
Right.
health aspect is critical.
Yeah.
I know we had programs to train kids about that, and they work.
Yep.
If a kid has someone they trust that they can talk to.
Yep.
Anyway,
So this works, but arming teachers won't work. Period.
Not unless you want to get more people killed.
More people killed. What a great way to take a break. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more of an upbeat on the second half when we start with suicide. We'll be right back after we take a break. And we're back. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
Again, what you all do, Every Mind, and so important, behavioral health, and for me, it's really the anti-stigma, and what you all are leading. And one of the things, though, that we need a stigma around, if we're going to try to prevent it, is suicide. Not in a way to avoid, but a way to embrace folks, I think, who are considering suicide, recognizing those characteristics that might be taking people there. I don't want to take your story away from you, but
No, not at all.
Suicide Prevention Month, tell us about what you all are
It is.
doing.
So it's National Suicide Prevention Month, and actually, I just wanted to go back and talk about MCPS, who does a really great job. They've got a program that's mandatory for all middle and high school students that's called Signs of Suicide. So I know that's a little, we're talking about
Good.
suicide, but in terms of Montgomery County Public Schools really recognizing that we need to learn to figure out what are those signs so that we can recognize them in each other.
Because that period of time in kids' lives, that's very, very key. I mean, that's a time when we see a lot of suicides. Teen suicide rates are
very high.
right. And
Yeah.
so what are some of the things that we can do in terms of preventing?
Well, so we've got a couple things going on. One of the things that's probably the easiest access for all of us is our Montgomery County hotline. So we answer the phones 24/7, 365 days a year, but we've also got call and text services. Most of our youth today are texting. We are open during the day. We're open about 45 hours a week for texting, and we get kids texting us from school. So we also do We have also another way to try and reach some folks more about talking about it, because I think, so we did a screening about the S word I talked about the last time, which
S-word
is
what
suicide.
Okay.
So this is a documentary about those that have taken their lives and their families and how they've dealt with it, and we are doing more screenings just to get it out and talking about it. We also are doing a forum for some of our our local faith leaders, trying to take the message back to their congregations so that it's not something taboo to talk about. That is the problem. The myth is that if you talk about suicide, you'll give somebody the idea. The truth is they've already thought about it.
Got it. They're
You
pretty
asking
far
them,
along, right.
yes, you asking them is not giving them the thought.
Right.
They're either going to tell you, no, I haven't thought about that, or they've given you the opportunity and said, like, yes, actually, I have thought about that.
And you actually give them a venue to speak.
Yep, you give them a safe space with no judgment, you know what, and more people than we know have thought about it.
My question is, first of all, I want to thank you for explaining what the S word was, because I went a completely different way with that. But secondly,
That's because you're in the White House.
that's right, every day. But secondly, and more importantly, my question goes to, there are various ways that people commit suicide. And when I speak with police officers, one of the things that they have trouble dealing with is the so-called suicide by cop. People who want to commit suicide but want other people
To
and
do
it's
it
not
for them.
to do it for them. How do you deal with that situation? Because that's got to be one of the most difficult. I mean, once you
Yeah.
get someone to admit that they're considering suicide is one thing.
Right.
But to have the forethought to do it with someone else.
Yeah. I wish I had a perfect answer for you about that. I don't know a lot about those that are really going so far to get the police to come and
someone
really-
else.
or someone else
Right.
and do it for them. I don't know a lot about that topic, but it is scary.
You mentioned you're doing outreach to teachers and faith communities.
Yeah.
My niece, who's a beautician, who took a course in listening for signs of suicide to sort of be able to intervene with any of her clients. I don't know whether that's part of your program.
No, but this is an excellent, so this is a different community than we typically interact with, and this is who we're trying to figure out. Like, the other thing we do is we teach mental health first aid, so we've probably all taken CPR and first aid. We know what to do if someone is bleeding. So mental health first aid is the same type of first aid for mental health, is basically what do you recognize.
And Ralph, what a great idea.
It really
great thing,
is.
because the informal counselors out there, and that's,
Yes.
and
Yes.
certainly that's a group, and we could certainly find different groupings out there, different professions where.
So it's
where
funny
see
you
that, yeah.
mentioned that. There's, so other than the teachers and administrators, another huge area that we've taught, and I know this goes back to MCPS, but is their safety personnel.
About a minute left.
Right, so this is, we talk about students or any of us just having that one person, and a lot of times the school safety personnel see way more than some of the teachers and other people. So we have gone out and done trainings for them also,
What's the
but I
first
love
step to
the.
take if you have a loved one that you suspect may be wanting to commit suicide?
So the first one is to ask and to not be scared of their answer. If you really are going to ask them, at least find some place that's maybe a little bit more private and be ready if they say, yes, in fact, I have thought about that. And when that comes, you can call our hotline. You can take someone to the local hospital if they have a plan. A lot of times when you really ask someone, they may not actually have a plan. They may have just considered it. And then you find them some resources, whether it's a therapist through their insurance company. There are local therapists also that you can call.
Ralph, sorry, I'm going to step on your time a little bit real quick, but to you, the informal counselors, to the school safety folks, back to the White House and the whole Kavanaugh thing, this on the September 20th daily, the New York Times is an interview with a New York Times reporter who was attacked in her car during high school by a boy who she just wanted to get a ride home with, and talks about her story of wanting to commit suicide immediately, never really talking about this anything, and still impacted by this 40 years or 30 years later.
Yeah.
And so what this is maybe opening up some good things, this whole story with Kavanaugh and his accuser and there. Please come back and tell us
Thank you.
more about
I
all the
will.
good work you all are doing. Ralph, sorry, voter suppression. What a horrible thing in a country that prides itself on democracy, rule of the people, and yet parties and those in power believe that by suppressing the votes of some, they stay in power.
People are intent on gaining any advantage, however unfairly they get it. So, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can put barriers to people registering to vote. There are a number of states, Alabama was one of them, that radically reduced the locations
Right.
where you could go to register to vote. There are other places that have reduced the number of polling booths. Although the most recent example of that, the local government did back down. They were under heavy pressure to not do that. It was clear they were shutting down.
That was rural Georgia.
Yes.
Right.
They were shutting down the polling places in African American neighborhoods.
Those darn Democrats, maybe.
Quite possibly.
Right. But it's an equal opportunity suppression, right?
Yeah.
It's Democrats. We justify. We're in. Republicans justify they're in. We got to suppress the other side's votes.
It doesn't matter which party it is if they're keeping American citizens from voting. It's just wrong. And
or those who want to become American citizens. That's what's the story behind the immigration, is that the Republican Party believes that newfound immigrants to the United States will overwhelmingly vote Democrats. So one of the reasons to suppress them coming into the country is to keep the Democrats from getting new voters.
And as an immigration attorney right now, we're seeing a great lengthening of the time for the citizenship process to try to keep them from becoming voters anytime soon.
yeah. Although League of Women Voters registers new citizens at the naturalization ceremonies up in Baltimore, people are so excited to get registered to vote, and that's one of the most gratifying things, because here you're getting people connected to our process. But
what's the worst? I mean, here in Montgomery County, in the state of Maryland, my understanding is that kind of voter suppression's along the edges. Maybe they don't put so many voting machines in a place that's from the opposite party, and so there are longer lines and a lot more for those from the same party that the governor or whatever. But you don't hear much about that here in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Well, I think it is really out on the edges. Maryland is pretty good about making voting convenient, but you do have to watch for any polling places that are not adequately resourced.
Right.
It was more of a problem when we had those touch screen machines, because you had to wait for a machine to become available. Now with the paper ballots, you can mark your ballots and they go in the scanner. Even if the scanner isn't working, there's a locked ballot box, so it's just like the old-fashioned ballot box. So there's a lot of it's not the problem that we're looking at in other states. I would throw in, though, that assuming everybody gets to vote and all of that part is fine, we still have gerrymandering, because that's another
We
way.
would never have something like that in Maryland.
Yeah,
That's the 6th congressional district.
we have some
The Tour to
prizes.
gerrymander, we covered that a few times.
Yeah. But
kayak.
it's just as bad. You go in to vote, but because the deck has been stacked, your vote doesn't mean as much as it should.
Well,
So-
my question is, do you think that we're making more of this now, or it's actually an increasing problem now? I mean, because of social media, internet, we make hay out of everything.
Actually, gerrymandering probably has gotten worse because
Voter suppression, I mean.
Oh, voter suppression. From the 1950s, when it was absolutely totally blatant, not as bad, but people are having to be more crafty in how they describe, voter identification laws, because we're worried about fraud.
There is none.
Yeah, the research for fraud turns up tiny handful
We talk about
of
those
cases.
immigrants who weren't U.S. citizens yet,
Yeah.
and that whole thing of maybe there's 16 in the country or something.
Yeah,
Nothing.
extremely tiny
Right.
numbers. Whereas in Pennsylvania, where they were pushing this voter ID law, they easily demonstrated 30,000 citizens were going to be banned from voting because they did
And
not
Donald
have
Trump won by overall 70,000 votes in key areas. So each vote does count.
Yeah,
So about
absolutely.
about 40 seconds left. Where do you see us? How can the people? How can we help in ensuring that every person gets a chance to vote?
Well, I think the thing is to be watchful. The League of Women Voters monitors the Board of Elections in Montgomery County and at the state. We're just trying to make sure that the processes are working efficiently. And the other thing is to just hold the feet, get hold of your representatives and hold their feet to the fire about you don't want to tolerate any voter suppression, and it needs to be aggressively discouraged.
Every person, one vote. That's what America was built on, wasn't it?
Yep.
And no.
It's an ideal that we need to hold ourselves to constantly,
Except
even
for
if
the
we've
Electoral College.
even if we've fallen short.
Because our founding fathers didn't trust us all that much.
That wasn't the fact.
That's our final word here, not trusting us too much, which is really the story of this entire episode. Thanks all of you here for joining me today. And thanks all of you in the viewing audience for joining us for this week's edition of Montgomery Week in Review. I'm Don Mooers, inviting you to join us next week at this very same time.